Hey, welcome to Overtime, where we take Sunday's message further. My name is Jeremy, and I'm your host. And this is a podcast where we just want to ask the questions that we think that you would ask as it relates to Sunday's message. And as we do so, we hope that it helps you grow in your life and your faith. With that being said, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of the podcasts that are coming out. Not only that, hit the like button, because when you do so, it helps us help other people. And if you ever have a question about Sunday's content or about Overtime, you can submit those to overtime@npaustin.com, and we will be sure to get to those in future podcasts. So with that being said, here's a quick recap of Sunday, and then we're going to jump into our conversation today.
I've heard the word Sabbath. And so then, as in most things that God kind of says, hey, I think this is a good idea for you, then we take it and we run with it. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So how are you at protecting your time? And could it be that you're feeling a little restless because you're not protecting being well rested? And so I've got these people in my world. If I'm being totally transparent, this cup probably gets the most of my attention. And then anything that's left, I'm like, oh, I just want to watch 1883. And then I'm empty. I can only give from what I have. What if I could stay connected to something that didn't run out? This is what rest is. So how do we do that? One, you're going to have to take an honest evaluation of your time. But it's not about do more or do less. What would God whisper in your ear right now about your level of restlessness or restfulness? What is something you could give up, something you could protect that would give you the opportunity to be more restful?
You pointed out that I didn't bring up Nashville, which was like a moment for me. I came home and talked to my husband about that.
Yeah. I was trying to think about how to introduce you today, and I was like, you like to be known as Jenny. So that's a little known fact. So if you guys see her on Sunday morning, just walk. Hey, Jenny, you did a great job. Or should I do the look, Jenny? Kind of like more like that. So that's something she really likes.
I hate that. Don't do that.
You didn't? I don't think you referenced being seasoned this week either, which may be a first.
I made a commitment to Jeremy because I felt like we drove that into the ground.
Yeah, it would have been kind of a softball this week talking about rest. There would have been so many like naps.
I'm so
and
old.
And
I need
rest. You could have thrown in there.
Yes,
and you kept it out of this one.
I did. I think I'm just feeling more comfortable.
Yeah,
right.
Like that's fantastic. I have somebody in my community group that's
old.
No, this isn't going to go well for you.
Good.
He very, very affectionately refers to you as that old lady, that seasoned old lady.
Oh my gosh.
He's
Who
older
is this
than you
person?
Are.
Do I need to know I know I have to know who this person is.
He's older than you are. It's just because you've called yourself that so many times. He's like, she just brings it up every time, so now I'm like
I've only brought it up 4 or 5 times and I'm laying it down. It's dead. Dead now.
But anyways, that didn't make it into this week's, and yeah, we were saying Nashville didn't either. There were no Nashville
I did no
references.
comparisons, and I don't know what, that was a very subconscious thing that you pointed out. You were like, you didn't say anything about Nashville versus Austin or Tennessee versus Texas. So then I felt upset.
Yeah.
Then I was like, I need to think about some things.
Yeah. Em and I are going to be in your hood in a couple of weeks.
Are you?
Yeah, end of April.
I have a standard email I send everybody. Like, here's the places to go and the things to see.
I actually really need that.
Are you just visiting?
The Nashville Half Marathon is April 23rd or something.
That is so awesome.
Yeah, so she's training to run it right now. I don't know if she's okay that I just went public with that because now it's like she can't back out.
Now she has to.
Yeah.
That is awesome. She'll love that.
Yeah.
I've had some friends that
heard
ran
it's
that.
like a cool vibe, and it's like the rock and roll half, so they have like bands, but I think it's like all country bands along. And
there is other music, but it's mainly that.
I had a good experience with country music when I went to, I've only been one other time. And I feel like historically I felt like kind of an outcast in Texas because I'm like, country music just not my thing. But when I think of country music, I think of like depressed people thinking about how like sad their life is and something like this. And it was a party the whole time. Like it was like everywhere we went was just such a vibe, and I was like, this is amazing. So
the song's about like field parties and like red Solo cups and all those things. Like that's a real Nashville thing.
Yeah, I was like, it's somewhere in me that I could enjoy this. But then I came back home and didn't like kind of get after it again. But while I was there, I'm like, I am a country music fan.
We talk about burnout. Like, I'm burnt out on country music. It's just when you grow up there, that's all you do.
That makes sense, though.
It's all that there is.
I get that.
Texas country, that's pretty good.
Texas is weird, right? So I was trying to explain to someone, sorry, now that we're on Texas, and Austin actually in particular is a different kind of country. It's a weird combo of like, it's got a touch of blues, a little bit of folk, and then a little bit of country. So it just it's its own thing. Honky tonk kind of feel like that is like genuine to me for Texas. Whereas in Nashville, it's more of a pop country sound.
Yeah.
And someone told me like Nashville has the industry and Austin has the scene, which totally makes sense when I listen. Even some of our worship here, I'm like, ooh, that feels Austin. Like you can feel an Austin vibe sometimes with like Jamie and Taylor do it in just a little different way. I'm like, yeah, that's Austin. That was worship Austin style.
Yeah. Yeah, you have more of a framework coming from a Nashville to an Austin. For me, I came from Ohio to Austin, and I'm like, Austin's the only country I know.
No, not big music scene in Ohio.
Not
what is Ohio known for?
Oh, man, sadness, rain.
What?
Poor sports teams.
Okay.
Kind of the city that once
Ohio
was.
is Cincinnati.
Heartbreak.
Right?
We have Cincinnati.
So the chili.
Yeah.
Skyline chili.
We do Skyline chili.
I love Skyline chili. And every now and then we'll randomly try and recreate it and make it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is it good? Like, can you?
Well, you can buy the Skyline chili packet.
Okay.
Because it's really the spice and, and that you put noodles with it, which is really weird. Yeah. But so it ends up being like chili on top of spaghetti.
That is actually good.
I had that for the first time at the Super Bowl this year, like at our Super Bowl party.
You had Skyline
That's the first
chili?
time you tried it?
Yeah.
Super Bowl?
Yeah.
Wow.
It was tasty. I liked it.
I like it.
Yeah.
My kids are like, stop trying to do things like that. So.
No, I love it. Okay. Well, we're glad to have you back on.
Long story short,
we're glad you're here.
People are going to be like, what am I watching?
You talked about rest this week, right?
Yes. And then came in this morning and was like, I'm super tired.
Yeah,
this
on the time
change got
week. Me. Yeah, I was asking you if you're tired the day after you speak, and you were like, no, it's the time change more than anything.
Oh, the time change. Well, and I'm getting older, as we like to reference.
That's why
apparently.
I'm less seasoned, and I get tired every Monday after I've spoken. So I was impressed when you said that. I was like, wow, okay, cool. So, but let's just jump back into it, because we were having the conversation that even in message prep, like this could be a series. There could be just a million different lanes and what abouts and what ifs. Lots of practical and lots of people wanting you to make it practical for them, when in reality, maybe we need to go figure out what this resting looks like for us individually as well. Yeah. So there's some like nuances like that.
Yeah, that's a big thing. I think that people wanted to, I had a couple conversations after the service. Well, so what does that look like for me? Or also, I get it, but like you're saying this, but I can't really do 24 hours. Or you're saying this, but does it have to be 12 hours? And which is ironic, because I really didn't say anything about hours specifically in the message.
A lot of assumptions.
But I think we bring in a lot of conversation around your day off.
Yeah.
And there's tons of work-life balance dialogue in leadership development content and work and faith stuff. You know, you're having this whole like, how can I show up as a parent and as an employee? And so I think that we hear things, but don't always like sit with it long enough to figure out what we specifically need to do. Because you couldn't even do a series based on like each person's situation.
Yeah.
Because personality is a factor.
Right.
And then also just your life season. So you can have two of the same personality, but one's got little kids and one has no kids.
Right.
Those are two very different seasons of life.
Yeah.
One might be a caregiver, work might be, so.
Yeah. Well, let's start in order through some of those. With that first one, if somebody's pushing back, maybe their internal lawyer is going off and they're like, okay, that's sweet, but that's just not realistic.
Nice idea.
Or I can't. I desire everything you talked about. And I'm like, that sounds amazing. I genuinely want that. But then I look at my family, or I look at my 3 kids, or I look at my job, or I don't have flexibility. I'm not my own boss. I'm not, whatever it might be. What do you say to somebody who's like, that's just not possible for me?
Depends on how well I know you. So I think that any time in life, not just about rest, but I had a conversation this morning on the phone. And in this conversation, I was presenting a bunch of options about, well, could it look like this? Or could we do this? Could we say this? Could we call this person? Could we have this conversation? And every scenario I gave was like, well, but no. Well, yeah, but. I think whenever we catch ourselves doing that, I think we need to slow down. Because for me, and I love the word you just used, and I've heard you say it before, I love that that internal lawyer, this idea that I'm building a case. I always call it paving. Like you are paving the way to tell me what you actually want to do or not do.
Right.
And you're trying to make it smoother by explaining to me all the reasons why or why not.
Totally.
And so I think whenever you're doing that with anything, whether it's like, hey, really, what about having a more vibrant marriage? Well, I get this but, and we're rationalizing it. I think that's an opportunity for God to slow us down and for us to get and sit and have that. I always talk about an honest evaluation. So I know in a busy season of my life, someone came in and had me write out everything I did. And I did it in kind of like I don't know, they call them like brain trees, mind map, right? Just bubbles, right? That would tangent to different bubbles. And I saw all the pockets of my life in one view. And I recognized, one, I didn't have as many pockets as I felt. But it was because some particular pockets were like more difficult than others.
That's really
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
like
no, totally.
in my head, I even had, at one point I had a frustration and a tension at work. And my boss was like, well, everybody's just going to clock their hours.
Yeah.
And I was like, psh, I got this. I'll show them I overwork.
Yeah.
And I actually clocked my hours, and I worked 38 hours a week on average. And I was like, but why does it feel like so much more? So so maybe map your day, maybe actually track your hours. The cool thing that we have with technology that I think we totally don't recognize is we have the ability to track and monitor our own patterns in ways we've never had before.
Yeah.
Right. So even your feelings and your emotions, like ride those waves and monitor them, and then 6 months later step back and go, isn't it weird that every 2 months this pops up? And I couldn't have known that if I didn't step outside of it long enough, right? So I think you could do things, if you're pushing back for any reason. Well, I've got little kids and they just need my attention, and absolutely, but then step back, look at your day. You have zero time, zero.
Yep.
I mean, I don't know if I said this in the service, but in my notes, I was going to confess that the other day I looked at my screen time, and I think at one point I realized I slept less than my screen time.
Wow.
And I was like, that's a bad number.
Yeah.
That's a terrible number.
And more common than you would probably even
right?
think,
And no one wants to admit that. So like in my household, so we're always talking about getting off our phones more and then not really doing it. And whoever brings it up is the one that's going to get attacked. Yeah. Right? Like, so it's like, well, maybe, you're on your phone or you got sucked into the TikTok scroll. That's like a phrase we're using all the time lately. Like, are you here? Are you here? And then it's immediately defensive. So I think anything that jumps up this, I want to give a litany of rationale. Like I want to say, oh yeah, but, when you add a bunch of buts, then I think you need to go, okay, maybe this is, and I know so much is going to come down to getting a mentor, a counselor, or spiritual director, right? Like, because that's what someone can do with you. Write out everything you do. And let's have an honest conversation about it. Yeah. And it may be that you do a ton of little things where it's, of course you can't sacrifice this or that, but what about just all these little dinky things over here that take up time? Yeah. Or even reprioritizing time if you have the resources. I just talked to my husband the other day. We mapped out our next 6 months, and between sports and family and trips and summer and getting ready to send one of my kids off to college, we have only between now and the end of August, only 6 Saturdays we are home. And that was ridiculous to me. I would have never seen, if I just kept going, I would have never seen that. Sure. So I immediately kind of called in my mind a halt on no more commitments between now and the end of August, which sounds insane. Right. But because I want at least those 6 days protected, where we're not going to have anything planned on a Saturday. But I have to see the time. I have to be honest with the time and be willing to start to protect it in different ways. Right. Yeah. Does that make sense? No, absolutely. I don't even know. Did I answer the question?
100%. Well, no, it's a fascinating starting point, because I've observed that for me, like in my life, I probably started feeling tired like maybe freshman year of high school. I don't know when it was. You know what I mean? It was like I remember falling asleep in class. So whatever. So I needed a 10-year window to even observe this or something of being tired. But I came to this point where I was like, okay, I've objectively had seasons that were more demanding and less demanding, but in my memory, I just feel like I remember being tired all the time, like an equal level of tiredness, even though I was like, wait, I was handling way more here than I am now and what is that? So the perception piece you bring up is really fascinating. Yeah. It takes a level of humility, self-awareness to even have that convo, and suggest, maybe perception is a little different than reality, but it's a really interesting starting point.
I do think it helps when you get someone from the outside in. No different than for us in our marriage, a financial advisor was huge for us. Because money, just like time, is a resource that we need and we have, but we view it very differently. Yeah. And so we got a financial advisor because my husband's he's an accountant, so he's all about, he sees it one way, and I was raised a totally different way with money. And it was a game changer for us when someone outside that wasn't emotionally attached to our money. So we are emotionally attached to our time.
Yeah. Wow.
And so to unpack that a little bit
Yeah.
with someone who is not emotionally attached to your time
Yeah.
could really pay off.
Yeah.
Right? Because they're not looking at it and going, like, if I look at your time, I don't know what Emily's thinking or pulling for, right?
Right.
Like, I don't know what all Buck is expecting you to do here.
Yeah.
But I can just look at your time and go, well, that doesn't seem to make sense.
Right.
What would it look like to reorient that over here, kind of thing?
Yes.
So I do recommend, one, look at your time honestly, but two, maybe find someone that's outside. That doesn't have to necessarily be a professional.
Yeah.
I don't think.
100%. I'm smiling a little because I'm thinking, like, our students are an interesting case study for this. The last, this message didn't really age well. The last message of Inside Out before the world shut down. So this is like March 7th, 2020. The bottom line of that message was create a space for face-to-face. And the challenge was like, go a day without your phone, like pull up the screen time app and just track it, right?
Yeah.
And it was all about connecting in person and like not digitally. And then we didn't meet again for like 6 months. But what was funny is as they were coming out of small groups and everything, the average screen time was over 8 hours. And for our students, and I have an empathy for them to be like, it is a really like, adolescence in human history is like still pretty new phenomena, of this like it's crazy, but these students are like going to school 40 hours and they have homework and they have jobs and they play sports and they got to keep up with everybody. I mean, it is a lot on them. So I like to advocate for students.
It is very different than it used to be.
Yes.
We get defensive about that generationally. Like, well,
Right.
it is harder.
Yeah, it is wild
harder
right now. But at the same time, thinking about, okay, but where did these 8 and 9 hours a day come from on your phone? Like, how do you sleep, or what is
Where
that?
is your time
going?
It's
crazy.
And time is an equalizer, right? We don't all have the same amount of money. We don't all have the same level of healthy relationships, but we all have the same amount of time.
Right.
And I do think like knowing that and paying attention to that is huge. And even speaking of like before shutdown, it's been very interesting, and I'm sure there'll be so much research done about how COVID impacted our understanding of time and how we adjusted to quarantine and how quickly we've adjusted back to busy and how at first we found value in no commute and now we're going back into commuting, and I wonder how all that's going to pan out as my work increases and I'm doing more in-person meetings. I'm finding my drive time feels different than it did pre-COVID, right? So that's even going to create a cultural shift, people working from home more. And we're finding you actually work more when you work from home.
Yeah.
So that's going to be,
interesting.
So work-life balance, all these, and I have a frustration with that phrase because I think it's delusional.
Yeah, you mentioned that Sunday. I liked that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I had a friend of mine say to me once, and I am all about balance. Like my personality is wired to find the right way, that line, and walk it. And then, ironically, I never do it, so it's amazing. So it's almost like God designed me to need Him. Weird, but as we start talking about that, a friend of mine said, wouldn't it be better if we showed up 100% as we need to show up in that space rather than trying to balance it all out?
Yeah.
And I've noticed that if I show up and I can be 100% mom in the moment that I need to be 100% mom. Right. But where I get tension in my life is when work is pulling at me and I'm trying to be 100% mom and 100% or 50-50, and it doesn't work like that. And so maybe if I could just say, hey, today I got to be 100% work because I have a lot going on this particular day. But after 5 o'clock, I'm 100% over here. Wow. And I like that kind of allocating our time a little bit more like that and thinking of it that way rather than trying to achieve some balance. Because I think we think when we arrive at that point, all of a sudden everything feels great. I don't know that that's how it works.
Sure. So if you're walking through that exercise, let's say you do that, and let's say you're even fairly objective about how your time is allocated. What's next? Because I know you were saying it's not just it's not just about saying no to things. Is the hope that you're going to find some space on there? Maybe you're going to find some things you're giving your time to that should be a no, so you can give yes elsewhere. Like if somebody's willing to map it out and say like, okay, Jen, I'll play along. What's the next step to somebody who's pushing back on you?
So I think honest conversations with yourself again about the why of all the things, right? So why do you do that? Why do you say yes to that? And what is the result of those yeses or those nos? Jesus says in Matthew, he says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Let anything other than this comes from the evil one. And I think it's his dramatic way of saying like, these words have power, honor them. So if you have commitments that you've said yes to, what can that yes look like without being bitter on the other side?
Right.
So we've looked at our time, and then we've looked at the things, taken an honest evaluation of why you do the things. And then I think it was Buck that said this in feedback, and I tried to put it in the message of just what gives you energy. And when you look at your plate or your map or whatever you want to call it, and you see all these things spread before you, which give you energy. There's like a diagram. I'm going to mess this up. And it's like you find the thing that you enjoy doing, the thing that gives you energy. It's like 4 circles, but in the middle is your purpose, is the idea, right? It's like a leadership thing. I think it's a John Maxwell diagram. And I love that thought, like all that intersects to be like your sweet spot with God, right? Yeah. So I think finding some things on that map or that poster that you make or the list that give you energy is huge, and investing in those things and seeing why they give you energy. And the more that you know you, so when the psalmist says in 139, and that's one of Buck's favorite psalms, like you're fearfully and wonderfully made. And he continues, he says, your works are wonderful, and I know that full well. So if you aren't attentive enough to know yourself full well, know your time, know your season, know your capacity, know your personality, the more you know those things, the more you're going to be able to identify, man, that really drains me versus that really gives me life. And then giving yourself permission. Yeah. The other thing is to have conversations with people that are going to be impacted by what you decide to do with your time. Yeah. Right? Like you're going to have a conversation with Emily. And everybody has a different hierarchy of conversation, but if I'm like looking at you, I'm thinking Emily is your priority. That is your first conversation. Yeah. Right? Right. And then we have other relationships that kind of flow from that. So maybe even looking at it together, maybe even asking some good questions. How do we want to protect time? And then the other thing I would say, and this is as a warning, because I like to find rules and procedures and processes and then think that we should do them until all time ends. Yeah. Right? That's makes so much sense to me. Like, this is how we do this, and we're going to do it that way. Very Enneagram 1 right? Forever. And so God has had to do a work in me of like, this is what I'm going to do for now. So if you've got little ones, make just a year plan. Just a year. Yeah. Hey, this year, this is how I'm going to protect that time. Yeah. This is how I'm going to practice Sabbath for the next 6 months. Stop trying to figure out a thing. Yeah. And then, because then you get focused on the doing of the thing rather than the being in the moment, right? When it becomes like a thing. So I would encourage people, look at your stuff, take an honest evaluation, highlight what gives you energy, what drains you, analyze why, have conversations with people that map impacts, and then just make a plan for just a little bit. Right. It doesn't have to be forever. Yeah. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. It's like, it reminds me of John Acuff's like finished book a little bit, how these like trying to be perfect on the front end, like we never even start. It's like the enemy of like getting stuff done. It's just like, well, I have to commit to that for the rest of my life. Like that's unrealistic. It's like, go ahead and try it for a week. And did you feel better next Sunday than this Sunday? Like, there's this little bit of this like kind of like what's kind of the risk of just one time, you know? How that one day feel? How that
just try it. Yeah. One of the things I didn't say Sunday, but when I feel like that pushback, I want to be, let's make a plan. First of all, I think there's value in a plan, especially for certain personalities, so I get it. And if you don't like the way your life looks at the end, you can just have your old life back. Yeah. Yeah. Let's give it right back to you. If it's worse, then you can have it all back. Yeah. So, but I do think there's value in that. Just like, okay, I'm going to try this.
Yeah, 100%. So then you were talking a little bit, I think knowing yourself maybe points to that personality a little bit, because you were saying at the beginning, another one was how do personalities work with this? Yeah. So how are you guiding somebody along to say, hey, this is going to be unique to the individual a little bit. There's not a one size fits all kind of antidote here.
Yeah, which is like a really difficult question for me to answer, because I'm just thinking, I just have to know you. But when you sit down to know someone, I love how impatient we are. We want to go to a counselor. We want to go to a spiritual director. We want the answer right then. Yeah, fix me. Yeah. Fix me right now. Give me a vitamin that will make it fix, or do the thing, right? And I think there are tools and resources that will equip us and guide us in better ways, but I think you've really got to know you. And so when I think about that question, the first thing I want to do is be like, well, tell me about you. Tell me about your story. Tell me about your life. Tell me about your world. And then let's just sit with that for a while, and that's a process. So when I think of certain personalities, think of what is almost counter to you, and there's probably some value in that. So there's two ways I think that God kind of nudges us. One, we have this, like I call it a spirit of conviction, right? Like something doesn't feel right, and we know that's off, and we need to go in a different direction. We need to turn and go in a different way. But there's also something that God likes a little bit of a refining. There's a discomfort in this refinement, right? That there's value to kind of overcoming things that just feel a little awkward and uncomfortable for us. So for me and my personality, I love lists and plans. And so in some of my time, I try and have space in my week to have no plan, which at first is like physically painful for me.
Yeah, I bet.
It is. I mean,
see that.
It's a thing.
Yeah.
My husband has a different personality than me, thank God. But he hates lists. So we've spent a lot of our marriage.
That's interesting. I was going to say, how
Yeah.
do y'all reconcile that one?
Well,
It's a daily
reconcile is a
struggle.
strong word.
Yeah.
So, but for him, it might be, making a list, right? And lists are just an easy go-to. But even anything that, in my walk, I think anything that feels like, oh, I don't know that I want to do that, God. When I'm in conversation with him, I'm like, I don't know that I want to do that. And I feel like this nudge of like, that's exactly why you should. So what is that thing that makes you go, I know there's value in that, but there's a million reasons I don't want to carve out space to do that.
Yeah.
So whatever that thing is, I struggle to be creative, like artsy creative, mainly because my type A kicks in, and I'm like those sips and strokes events that people do. I go and I pay because I love the community that it builds. I will never, ever keep a piece of that artwork in my life because it's not going to ever be right.
It's not going to be correct.
It's not. I look at the example the artist does, and I'm already done.
Yeah.
So I think that God enjoys. So for me, would be like just color.
Yeah.
And I would be like, that sounds so not productive, and it's not going to look the way I want. And then God is like, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Like, that's why we're going to do it.
100%.
Just for 30 minutes, just sit with me. And this sounds so cheesy, but like, just sit with me in color. Sit with me and do nothing. Let's go out for a walk and try not to put in your AirPods to listen to one more thing, because I have a lot of noise. I love books. I love podcasts. I love all those things, and I'm soaking them up. So sometimes it needs to be nothing, except for this podcast, of course, which you should listen to on repeat.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Being passionate about all of our digital initiatives here at Northpoint, I would still advocate that. I don't know how, like, there isn't some technology break in your rhythm. Like, it feels, when we said there's not a one, one size fits all, but I'm like, gosh, in our current culture, and there seems to be a pretty incredible lack of awareness around how much technology has infiltrated. Like, it's it's for students, for young people, it's such a normal part of their lives. It's just always, and it's all they know. And then I come across a lot of adults who are like, they think it's a kid problem. They think it's a student problem. They're like, I'm good. And you're like, man, the screen time app is just wonderful for that. It's just a black and white objective. You can't argue with it.
You can. It is amazing how people do argue. But and I think I mentioned to this when we were doing message prep, but I've been fascinated by, there's a new book that came out called Dark Maps of the Mind. But anyway, don't look up the book. My point is, I've been fascinated with this author's studies on how we've lost the skill of navigation because of GPS.
Yeah.
So what he's saying is that there are dark parts in our mind that are going darker because we no longer rely on our points and our bearings. Yeah. So for me, this is a bigger message. Yeah. Like, we are designed to be grounded and connected to not just nature, but to God in a way that we are orienting. And when we shut all that off, it goes dark, right? So in just the smallest ways with the map thing, like, I'm trying to not use my GPS as much. I totally was late for a meeting, got lost. Like, I'm having to build in a little extra time to flex those muscles. And Matt just did a series with the students about flexing different kind of courage muscles and faith muscles. And what we talked about is it's not just 12 reps and done, right? It's more like probably cardio. It's something you're gonna have to do a little bit consistently and rhythmically so that you build up to what you want to be. But if we're not careful, if we're not using some of those quietness centers in our brain, right? Shutting down the screens from our eyes for just a minute. And I think that's where I struggle. It's not about shame. I'm on my phone all the time.
Right.
I am going all the time. And God does not need me to rest because he's not sure how he's going to structure the universe if I'm not rested.
Yes.
Rest is for me.
Yes.
And I will be able to show up as a better mom, a better friend. I will be able to be more present and more show up as my whole self. I'll be a better employee if I'm doing that from a place of rest. Yeah. So accessing that stuff or making sure we're not only, seeing things through a screen kind of thing. But
yeah.
I always hate to say that because I feel bad. It's not shame. It's
Well, and if you haven't tried it, I mean, I remember at one time recommending in a message, it was like a relationship series going on like a technology-free date. And it was like unbelievable how mind-blowing the suggestions seemed to be to people, and you get this like moment at some point on the date night of, oh, the rest of human history interacted this way. Like,
so
we're
weird.
Okay. What if there's an emergency? Let's take one phone. Let's all this stuff. And you're like, what if you didn't?
Yes.
I have to have a day where I take my Apple Watch off and I still get phantom, text on my wrist. My wrist is still buzzing. And I'm like, oh, and there's nothing there.
That should be an indicator that as a culture, when it's
I'm
my phone is buzzing,
yeah.
and it's like, no, your phone's not near you.
Yeah. Em and I, we haven't even replicated this on vacations. We'll do a day or two or something. But for our honeymoon specifically, we put the phones in the safe. We did that thing and it was eight days. And it was still one of the most memorable experiences. I remember having a night we were having dinner and I was Inside Out, because Inside Out, high school environment happens in the afternoons. Inside Out had happened and I hadn't thought about it. And it was that I haven't not stressed about, a work related thing on a work day. And I think as long as I've worked, which I mean, at that point wasn't that long, but it was I was oh my gosh. And it is wild to really disconnect and experience it that way. So,
but I love that you share that because that's that discomfort we kind of have to push through.
Mm-hmm.
If you go on a date night without your phone, and then you have a rule of we're actually not going to for us, we're not going to talk about our kids. We're going to talk about us.
Yeah,
it's oh, that sounds terrible.
Yeah,
because we have to kind of get over the real. It's a detox.
Yep,
and not because we're weak and dependent. Not that it just is. It's just getting something out of your norm. And I love that. I love that I can't fathom putting my phone in a safe for 8 days, but I feel like we so should.
Well, like I said, it took a once-in-a-lifetime experience for us to even do it, So it's not we've repeated it, but it was amazing. So, okay, so we've talked personalities. We talked about pushback. Seasons was another one that you had talked about, people asking questions about just what this looks like. Is there a real seasonality? Because that's going to be one of the defenses that comes up in our head. And then how do you navigate or accept this? Well, maybe how do you determine if you're in a season or not? Because that's another thing that we get thrown out a lot.
Yeah, I'm actually going to deflect to you because you made a great statement about the statement I'm thinking about.
It's a Carrie statement. It's a stolen quote. Yeah.
Oh, well, I attribute it to you. So
the thing is Carrie Newhoff that says something if you don't have a definitive end date to your season, it's not a season. It's your life, right? I mean, finals in college, are an easy one to think about. Yes, this is unique. I'm going to pull some all-nighters. I know the date of my last final, and then summer is here or whatever.
Yeah.
If you're some of those, roles and jobs, it's end of quarter. If you're a teacher in the summer's coming, there's an end date. If you have a child, that's tougher because it's difficult to say I'm in an 18-year season.
You're lucky.
To some extent you are, and it's good to know when you have a child in your home and someday you won't, and to prioritize things a little bit differently. But you also can't say I'll rest 22 years from now or whatever that's going to be. You know what I mean? So, I don't know. That's the quote I think you're referring to.
No, I love that when you said it because I do think that there's a lot of power that comes from acknowledging that seasons, there's a difference in a lifestyle and a season. Parenting is one that I think is interesting because you keep telling yourself I can't wait till they get out of diapers. And that'll be so much easier. Or I can't wait till they can walk or they can communicate with me. And then they communicate and you're stop communicating. Each season, right, of parenting, because it's just such an easy example, each season of parenting has its own, it's not going to get better or worse, it's going to get different. So stop thinking if you can remind yourself, I'm not getting out of this, not it's like jail, a sentence, but this is going to get different. It's not necessarily going to get easier or harder, right? Yeah. It's just I'm going to exchange diapers for something else. I'm going to exchange up late at night because they don't sleep yet for sports, driving them 50 things, lessons, music, all that stuff. I'm gonna feel like that's crazy. Then I'm gonna exchange it for anxiety because they're driving and figuring out college prep, or you're just gonna exchange for certain seasons. So knowing that, I think, is valuable. And then I think, we talked a little bit about saying yes and no. I think owning your yes is important. So I had a woman in one of my small groups several years ago, and she was a caregiver. And she was a caregiver for an aunt, but she had been a caregiver for her mom prior to her aunt. And she was a great caregiver. She did not want her relatives to be in a nursing home. She wanted them at her house. But being a caregiver for someone at this point, this person was 100% dependent upon her for meals, as well as like care and like bathing. It's a lot of work. So every week she would come in and she would be like, I can't, it was always about that. We would have these conversations, and they were totally valid, and she was tired, and I get it. But at one point, and I was young in ministry, so I probably would walk this out a little differently. I just said, you can put her in a nursing home. And she was so mad. And I didn't say it because I meant she should. I said it to get her to own her yes. You've chosen to honor your family in this way, and that is a beautiful thing. Wow, and I don't think you're going to regret that. Like when Jesus says to Mary, Martha, Mary's chosen this one thing and it won't be taken from her. When you step into, as a parent or as a caregiver, or you decide, I'm going to take on this mantle of leadership in this job, you did say yes. And we're like, well, I don't have any choice. Oh, I'm not saying you have good choices. Yeah. I'm not saying your options are easy. But you did say yes. And when you go around your life like a victim and you're like, how did I end up caring for my parents? Well, because you chose to care for them, and that's a beautiful thing. Yeah. But you did choose it. Well, what am I going to do with these kids? You did. Yeah. I know we have a theory on accidental things. We know what does this. We know the cause. Yeah. So I just think that sometimes just saying, okay, I did choose this. I said yes, and we can do that in small ways too. I said yes to this commitment, and I can either choose to let this defeat me, or I can be empowered by the fact that I said yes to this, and I'm going to step into that. And it doesn't mean you won't be tired, and it doesn't mean it will be easy, but it does mean you can own it. And there's a sense of, I think it can almost, I don't know that it necessarily releases you. I think some people will hear that and be like, well, that doesn't help me at all. But can't it? If you recognize, you're choosing this job. Yeah. Well, I have to pay my bills. Yeah, but there are other jobs you could choose. There are other ways you could pay your bills. Yeah. Or you could not pay your bills. I know that's an extreme. I'm a fan of paying bills. But I'm still
glad you endorsed that here on this podcast.
Pay your bills. But I do think that just like you have to own your no, if you say no to being in community, I feel so alone, I'm so busy, but I'm so isolated, I have no time for friendships. Well, then you're going to have to own that no. Right. So just taking ownership of your time and your yeses and your nos, I think, is big enough.
Yeah. No, that's huge. That's huge. Wow. Well, I think first time let's finish with this last one. Okay. Another question you were getting was, how does family fit into that? To say, if I'm going to go in and I'm going to choose a time, a window at 12 hours, at 24 hours, or whatever, you choose for yourself. Are my, little kids a part of that? Is this time, alone? Is this with my spouse, or is it, what does that look like to?
So I think, again, it's tough with, it's going to come down to an individual conversation of personality. I'm thinking of some relationships I have where I think that the kids have become the sole focus of the marriage, right? So especially for mom, and one thing I have in my head, the kids are the world. So I would actually say, maybe for part of your Sabbath is I'm going to go for a walk with my husband, or I'm going to sit and have a meal, or I'm going to set aside some time. So, for me, actually, I think that it's easy for Sal and I to get wrapped up in each other's worlds. We're like, oh, we have kids. Not that we forget they're there, but the four of us undistracted is very valuable in that time. I think Jeremy said this, and I know I said it in the first service, and I think I blanked in the second service, but he said, just make a list of the things that connect you to God, and then do those things for a day a week. Now, so for me, honestly, just the four of us is a rarity. So we're going on vacation this week. It's just the four of us. That is a big time for me. So if I just built in, just a dinner with the four of us. But then I also had a time when I'm listening to something or reading something that really just spiritually nourishes me. It's not for 12 hours you do one thing, right? It doesn't have to be that way. But so I think your family can become a part of that. I would actually encourage, especially spouses, like if you've got a relationship that is that intimate to you, like you want to share with them. You go for a walk by yourself and you come back and share, as awkward and uncomfortable as it can even be. Like, this is what I heard, or this is what I felt, or this is what I'm thinking through. Or maybe you and just your immediate nuclear family go do one of the sips and strokes painting things. Don't invite me, because I'll hate it. I'll go, but I won't like it. So I think that, yes, I think your family can play a role unless your family has become a deflection. Yeah. Because it does happen, and we don't really talk about that a ton, but sometimes, and then we end up, this is what breaks my heart, we end up, and our kids are gone, because that is going to be a window. They aren't made for us, right? They belong to us for a season. I tell my kids all the time, the window that God gave you to me is just getting smaller and smaller, and they love that. I'm like, you think you love that. But when I see that window close for people, and then they're like, oh, wait a minute, I have a marriage. Yeah. And it breaks my heart to think that we've either opted to, kind of have like a lackluster relationship, or get out. Yeah. I'm like, there's that third option, which could be to stay connected. And so I would say family is a part of it unless unless certain dynamics in your family become a deflection. I think that family dinners can be just a great thing, regardless of the size of your family. But I do think you need some space for just you in some portion of that time, right? So if you used a Sunday, like you could look like, I think coming to Northpoint would be great. So you come to church that morning, and then maybe you go to lunch and you chat about what you heard, right? Be intentional about it. You don't go to lunch and you sit on your phone, right? Or you don't just go all go your separate ways. Maybe you intentionally say, we're going to sit down afterwards, and then everybody goes their separate way, and then you go to Brushy Creek and just walk one time around, right? Like, so take your day, take your time, and kind of structure it. I know some people that are like, one lady's like, I go get my nails done. Like, that's what I do on Sundays, and I just sit, and I'm just there, and I'm just thinking, and I'm just praying. I'm like, that's perfect. Yeah. Right? So find your thing. Some of it will be probably together. I think some of it needs to have some spiritual depth. So I think just going for a walk for 12 hours can be beautiful, but there is something, take at least like a book or a podcast. Take a thing that pushes you spiritually a little bit. Devotions are great because they're just enough of a bite for you to but don't get the same devotion you don't, stretch yourself just a tiny bit. Right. So I think, yes, family is a part of it, but you have to be honest with yourself about if family is easier than just being quiet with your own thoughts. Wow. Yeah.
No, it's so good. Yeah, so many just practical insights in here through all of this.
Hope so. I hope so.
Sunday. Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for speaking yesterday. I feel like it's an event at Northpoint every time you do. Everybody's excited.
Especially on daylight savings time. Yeah.
So thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks again for joining in and hopping on this podcast after our time change. We're all still recovering from that.
Yeah, so I'm going to go home and take another nap.
Appreciate you. That would be good. So I really do appreciate it. Hope to have as much wisdom as you do when I grow up.
Oh my gosh, stop. Who is this? I have to know this person in your community group, by the way. We have to have a conversation.
I'll tell you afterwards.
Okay.
So thank you, Jenny. Thank you.